We tend to think that if someone builds a case using only verified, objective facts, their conclusion must logically follow. Yet some of the most deeply flawed arguments operate entirely with true information. Deceptive logic often hides within the structural arrangement of an argument, independent of the facts themselves, to a specific logical trap known as the fallacy of ignoring the counter-evidence. It is a tactic that artificially inflates an argument's strength through the systematic omission of opposing data. The hidden reality beneath the surface dictates an argument's validity as much as the evidence visible on the scale. Structural completeness in logic requires a full accounting of reality. Relying on a curated subset of facts leaves an argument inherently invalid. To evaluate this structural failure, we look to the framework established in T. Edward Dahmer's Attacking Faulty Reasoning. Dahmer identifies a foundational rule for logical integrity called the rebuttal criterion. To satisfy this rule, a good argument must actively anticipate, confront, and neutralize the strongest counter-evidence against its own conclusion. Stripping the rebuttal process out of the structure creates a one-sided ledger, giving the audience a false impression of an ironclad deduction. We can map exactly how this structural failure operates in the real world by reverse engineering 3 specific case studies, moving from high-stakes ethics to everyday consumer choices. Failing the rebuttal criterion transforms what appears to be an objective, factual deduction into a carefully constructed illusion. To process these arguments, we will use a split-screen system, mapping stated facts against omitted reality. Consider a common argument advocating for swift capital punishment. The proponent claims we should execute serious offenders immediately, offering 3 premises. It removes dangerous individuals from society, it saves the massive costs of long appeals processes, and it deters potential criminals. These premises on the left side of the matrix are highly relevant. They are factually trackable points that make the argument feel robust and persuasive. However, evaluating the other side of the matrix exposes a massive missing variable: the constitutionally guaranteed right to due process and an appeals procedure. Precluding the right to appeal introduces a severe risk of executing innocent people. This ethical hazard completely disrupts the initial cost-saving logic. Because the original argument ignores this critical constitutional and ethical variable, it automatically fails the rebuttal criterion. Ethical arguments cannot be treated as logically valid if the arguer artificially scrubs systemic risks from the equation. This logical filter isn't restricted to life and death debates. It appears constantly in everyday consumer utility scenarios, like evaluating the purchase of a motorcycle. A critic might argue against buying a motorcycle based on negative traits. Their stated premises: motorcycles are dangerous, they are noisy, they only seat 2 people, and they involve constant weather exposure. Every single one of these negative variables is factually true. On their own, they form a structurally sound list of drawbacks. But look at the omitted counter-evidence. The critic has ignored the positive utility variables. Motorcycles are inexpensive, highly maneuverable in traffic, and exceptionally easy to park. When the full ledger of data is balanced against the negative claims, the absolutist conclusion against buying a motorcycle collapses. The decision becomes a trade-off, not a certainty. A valid argument evaluating the worth of an object must address opposing factors directly. It cannot pretend the benefits do not exist. Utility logic is invalid when the arguer stops being an objective evaluator and acts as a filter for reality. We see this filtering process perfectly in arguments about consumer preferences, such as the claim that watching movies at home is objectively superior to going to the theater. The advocate for staying home builds an impressive list of premises. Renting is cheaper, there's no need to drive, no need to hire a babysitter, and you avoid high concession costs. This presents a highly persuasive economic argument. The facts are correct, and the math heavily favors the living room, but the matrix requires the omitted variables. The home viewer is ignoring delayed release windows, the audiovisual impact of the big screen effect, and the inherent social value of a night out. These unaddressed variables represent valid counter-preferences. By ignoring them, the arguer destroys their claim of absolute objective certainty. Looking across all 3 disparate topics, capital punishment, motorcycle safety, and movie theaters, a clear structural pattern emerges. Notice that in every single scenario, The stated premises on the left side of the matrix were never factually false. Logic fails when conclusions are drawn from a strictly curated subset of reality. Omissions are as fatal to an argument as outright lies. Recognizing this fallacy is the first step. Dismantling it in live discourse requires a specific attack protocol. The intervention begins at the top node, identifying missing variables. Then, force the arguer to demonstrate how opposing data doesn't damage their position. If they refuse, the path reaches the final node, forcefully integrating the damaging evidence into the model yourself. Making hidden variables explicit derails the opponent's carefully constructed narrative. It forces the conversation out of their curated subset of facts and back into objective reality. Forcing the structural integration of missing data is the only legitimate way to test the true limits at emergement. Watch out for the decoy tactic. Skilled arguers will attempt to weaponize the rebuttal criterion to deceive you. The decoy occurs when they quickly dispose of a minor objection, placing a tiny counter-evidence block on the scale to simulate objectivity. This tactic tricks the evaluator into thinking the rebuttal criterion has been satisfied. The arguer appears reasonable and open to debate, while the fatal objections are still being ignored. You cannot settle for the trivial objections the arguer volunteers to share. You have to actively hunt for the strongest counterarguments available. The core rule of the rebuttal criterion holds firm. An argument is not finished until it has finished off its strongest criticisms. A truly defensible, structurally sound position does not fear counterevidence. It requires it. Never accept a conclusion until the ledger of evidence is fully balanced.